The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor that Maria had just finished mopping for the third time that night. It was 2:47 a.m. at Apex Defense Systems, the sprawling military contractor facility on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas, where the air always smelled faintly of gun oil and desperation. Maria Gonzalez pushed her cleaning cart past rows of cubicles where engineers in rumpled shirts hunched over glowing screens, their faces illuminated by lines of code that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics to her. "Hey, custodian lady," one of them called out, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty of the exhausted and overworked. "Make sure you don't delete any files while you're emptying the trash, okay?" The laughter that followed was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of servers like broken glass. Maria kept her head down, her graying hair pulled into a tight bun, her uniform 2 sizes too big, because that's what the supply closet had. She was 52 years old, a widow with 3 grown sons who barely called, and this was her life, now scrubbing away the evidence of other people's brilliance while they mocked her very existence. If you're loving this kind of intense, real-life drama that hits you right in the chest, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story that could be happening right next door to you. Maria had been cleaning at Apex for 6 years, ever since her husband Carlos died in a car accident on I-35, leaving her with a mortgage she couldn't pay on a teacher's aide salary. The engineers called her the Ghost because she worked the night shift, appearing and disappearing like smoke, always there but never acknowledged. Dr. Harlan Mitchell, the lead weapons designer with his Harvard degree and his $1,000 watch, was the worst. He'd leave coffee rings on his desk deliberately, knowing she'd have to scrub them out. "It's good for her," he'd say to his team. "Keeps her in her place." They had no idea that Maria had once been someone else, entirely someone who understood the language of destruction better than any of them ever would. The turning point came on a Tuesday in late October when the facility went into lockdown mode for a classified project codenamed Reaper. Security was tripled, and even the cleaning staff had to pass through metal detectors and biometric scanners. Maria was pulling double shifts, her hands raw from industrial cleaners, when she wheeled her cart into the restricted weapons lab. The room was a fortress of steel and glass, with prototype rifles lined up like soldiers on parade. One caught her eye immediately, a sleek, black weapon that looked more like a piece of modern art than a tool of death. It had no serial number, just a series of etched markings along the barrel that glowed faintly under the LED lights. Maria recognized the pattern instantly, though she hadn't seen it in over 30 years. Her breath caught in her throat as memories flooded back. Dusty streets in San Salvador, the crack of gunfire, her father's hands guiding hers on a much cruder version of this very design. Dr. Mitchell burst into the lab then, his face flushed with the kind of excitement that only comes from being on the verge of something revolutionary. "Gonzalez, what the hell are you doing in here?" His voice echoed off the reinforced walls. Behind him, his team of 6 engineers filed in, their eyes bloodshot from weeks of overtime. Maria froze, her hand still inches from the rifle. I was scheduled to clean at 0300, she stammered, her accent thickening under stress the way it always did. Mitchell snatched a clipboard from his assistant. "You're not on the list. This is a level 5 clearance area. Do you have any idea what you've just compromised?" The engineers formed a semicircle around her, their expressions ranging from annoyance to outright hostility. "She's probably taking pictures for the Chinese," one muttered. "Or the cartel's paying her extra to spy," another joked, though his eyes were deadly serious. They marched her to security, where Director Reynolds, a former Marine, with a crew cut and a permanent scowl, waited in his glass office. The interrogation room was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you doubt your own memories. "Mrs. Gonzalez," Reynolds began, sliding a folder across the table, "we've been watching you. Unusual patterns in your cleaning routes. Excessive time spent near sensitive equipment. Care to explain?" Maria's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos, her pausing outside server rooms, her lingering near prototype cases, her studying documents left carelessly on desks. To them it looked like espionage. To her, it was muscle memory from a lifetime ago when reading blueprints in stolen moments meant the difference between life and death. The truth was simpler and more devastating than any of them could imagine. Maria Gonzalez hadn't always been a janitor. 35 years earlier, in the mountains of El Salvador during the Civil War, she had been Maria Elena Vasquez, teenage prodigy and daughter of the country's most brilliant weapons engineer. Her father, Dr. Antonio Vasquez, had designed revolutionary rifle modifications for the government. Forces modifications that turned standard-issue weapons into something far more lethal. Maria had been his shadow, his apprentice, his secret weapon. By age 17, she could disassemble and reassemble any firearm blindfolded, could calculate ballistic trajectories. In her head, could etch guidance codes into metal with a steady hand and a stolen dental drill. But then came the night the guerrillas raided their village. Her father was executed in front of her. His designs burned, his daughter left for dead with a bullet in her shoulder and a promise extracted under torture. Never speak of what you know. She had fled north, crossing borders. With nothing but the clothes on her back, and the codes burned into her memory. The journey took 2 years through Guatemala, Mexico, across the Rio Grande, in a tire tube, while Border Patrol helicopters thumped overhead. She learned English from soap operas in migrant shelters, buried her accent under layers of practiced Americanisms, married. Carlos Gonzalez, who never asked about the scar on her shoulder or the nightmares that made her scream in Spanish. When he died, cleaning was the only job that would take a 50-year-old woman with no formal education and a work history that ended in 1987. But the knowledge never left her. It lived in her fingers, in the way she noticed imperfections in machinery in the nightmares, where she still heard her father's voice, explaining muzzle velocity and wind resistance. Back in the interrogation room, Reynolds was losing patience. "We found this in your locker," he said, producing a small notebook filled with what looked like random numbers and symbols. Maria's heart stopped. It was her grocery list, but written in the shorthand her father had taught her coordinates that could calibrate a rifle. Scope, measurements that could adjust for atmospheric pressure, formulas disguised as quantities of rice and beans. "This is encrypted," Reynolds growled, "military-grade encryption. You're looking at 20 years, Mrs. Gonzalez. Maybe more if anyone dies because of what you've stolen." The room spun. Her sons would be notified. Her grandchildren would grow up knowing their Abula as a traitor. The engineers watched through the one-way glass, some satisfied, some uneasy. Dr. Mitchell looked almost disappointed, like a child whose toy had been broken. But then came the moment that would change everything. Reynolds, in his frustration, had left the prototype rifle on the table between them, the same one from the lab, brought in as evidence of her tampering. Maria's eyes locked onto the etched markings again. They were wrong. Critically, catastrophically wrong. The guidance system code had been reversed, the calibration sequence inverted. Whoever had designed this weapon had made a mistake that would cause it to fire wild after 3 shots, potentially exploding in the operator's hands. She knew this because she had seen the correct sequence carved into her father's workshop. Wall, the night he died, had memorized it while guerrillas dragged him away. Her hand moved before her brain caught up, fingers tracing the metal, like a pianist finding middle C. "It's backward," she whispered. Reynolds leaned forward. "What did you say?" Maria's voice grew stronger, the accent fading as muscle memory took over. "The code, it's mirrored. The third sequence should be 7 to 4-9, not 9 to 4-7. And the pressure valve is set to 3,200 psi when it needs to be 2,800 for this alloy. You're going to lose soldiers." The room went silent. Reynolds stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Through the glass, Dr. Mitchell's face drained of color. He burst into the room without knocking. What did she just say? What followed was 3 hours of the most intense technical interrogation Maria had ever experienced, and she'd been questioned by death squads at 15. They brought in whiteboards, projectors, every prototype in the facility. Maria stood in her janitor's uniform, hair escaping her bun in wisps, and dismantled their entire Reaper project with the precision of a surgeon. She identified 17 critical flaws, 3 of which would have caused catastrophic failure in field conditions. She redesigned the guidance system on a napkin using a borrowed pen, her hands moving with the grace of someone who'd done this in candlelight while bullets flew overhead. The engineers went from skeptical to stunned to reverent. Dr. Mitchell, the man who had mocked her for years, stood with his mouth actually hanging open as she explained quantum tunneling in ballistic computation, a concept he was still struggling to grasp. By dawn, the facility was in chaos, but the good kind. Generals were being woken up, emergency clearances granted, million-dollar contracts rewritten. Director Reynolds personally escorted Maria to the executive conference room where a general in full dress uniform waited with a proposition. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said, "we need you, not as a consultant, as lead designer. The Reaper project is yours if you want it." The salary he quoted made her knees weak enough to pay off her house, send her grandkids to college, buy the kind of security she'd never known. But more than that, they offered her something she'd lost the night her father died: purpose. The revenge came not in shouting or violence, but in the sweetest way possible: competence. Dr. Mitchell was reassigned to quality control, reporting directly to the woman he had called custodian lady. The engineers who had mocked her now brought her coffee with shaking hands, asking questions like eager students. Maria moved into an office with windows that actually opened, but she kept her cleaning cart in the corner as a reminder. She wore tailored suits now, but always with the same practical shoes. She'd spent too many years on her feet to trust heels. The Reaper rifle, redesigned with Maria's corrections and innovations, became the most reliable weapon in the U.S. arsenal. Soldiers in the field started calling it La Fantasma, the ghost, after the woman who had appeared from nowhere to save their lives. Maria flew to Walter Reed to meet the first Marine whose life her design had saved, a young man from Laredo, with a prosthetic leg and a story about how his rifle never jammed during a 12-hour firefight. He saluted her with tears in his eyes. She cried too, remembering her father's dream of creating weapons that protected rather than destroyed. But the past has long shadows. 6 months after her promotion, a man appeared at Apex with Salvadoran military credentials and questions about Dr. Antonio Vasquez's daughter. He found Maria in her office, now decorated with awards and photos of her with the Secretary of Defense. "Señorita Vasquez," he said in Spanish, "your country needs you again." The Civil War was long over, but new threats had emerged: cartels with military-grade weapons, terrorist cells, with funding from places that didn't appear on maps. They wanted her father's final design, the one he died protecting, a rifle that could fire accurately, at 2 miles in any weather condition, using technology 30 years ahead of its time. Maria stared at the man who had once been her father's protégé, now aged and desperate. The code was still in her head, every digit, every variation. She could give it to them and become a hero in El Salvador, or keep it buried and protect the world from a weapon that could shift balances of power overnight. The choice tore at her: the janitor who had found power, the daughter who had lost everything, the engineer who understood the cost of creation. In the end, she made her decision in the same lab where she had once mopped floors. She invited the Salvadoran delegation, the Apex board, and every engineer who had ever mocked her. With the original prototype rifle on the table, the one with her father's code etched into the barrel, she demonstrated what happened when absolute power met absolute responsibility. Then, in front of them all, she melted the rifle down in a crucible, destroying the last physical link to her father's forbidden design. "Some knowledge," she said, her voice steady, "should die with its creators." The room was silent. Dr. Mitchell was crying. Director Reynolds saluted. The Salvadoran delegation left with nothing but respect and a job offer Maria politely declined. She kept her position at Apex, but on her terms, designing defensive systems, never offensive ones. She started a scholarship program for children of immigrants, taught night classes in engineering to janitors and security guards, proved that genius doesn't need a degree, just opportunity and the courage to claim it. Years later, when Maria Gonzalez retired at 70, the facility named its new research wing after her. The dedication ceremony was packed: generals, politicians, every employee who had ever worked with her. Her grandchildren sat in the front row, wide-eyed as their abuela received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But the moment that meant the most came afterward, when a young janitor, a girl from Honduras with calloused hands and frightened eyes, approached her hesitantly. "Señora Gonzalez," she whispered, "they say you were once like me." Maria smiled, the same smile she'd worn while scrubbing floors, and pressed something into the girl's hand, a small notebook filled with numbers and symbols that looked like grocery lists, but weren't. "Study these," she said, "and never let anyone tell you what you're worth." The fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, but now they illuminated possibility instead of drudgery. Maria Gonzalez, the janitor who became a legend, walked out of Apex Defense Systems for the last time. With her head high, her practical shoes clicking against the floor she no longer had to clean. Behind her, the rifle with the code that had started it all hung in a glass case, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room isn't the gun. It's the person everyone underestimated. From which part of the country are you watching this video?